Hi guys, welcome back. I'm Ian Laspina, and today we're going to take a look at the early history of the coat of plates up to the mid 14th century. Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're going to take a look at the early history of the coat of plates, kind of when it developed through about the mid 14th century, and then we'll carry on looking at more advanced examples in a future video. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, a coat of plates is basically a form of torso armor where instead of having a single large solid breastplate like we see in the late 14th century and onwards, instead we see a series of smaller plates that are riveted to a foundation textile, mostly textile, that actually gives it its structure, because it's not self-supporting like a single large breastplate. It needs something else in order to provide that structure. And before we look at the history, I just want to make a quick note of what these foundations were typically made from. So far and away, based on inventories, wills, survivals, the most common thing that we see used for the foundation of a coat of plate style armor is some sort of textile, often a very stout textile like fustian canvas. Hemp was often used as well, and this provides that foundational layer for the rivets, for the plates to be riveted to. We also see coverings used in conjunction with these foundations. So the plates themselves are riveted to the foundation, which provides the real structure. And then over that foundation, you may see a fancier cover like a silk or a velvet, which may not be suitable or strong enough to serve as that strong foundation on its own, but still presents a fancier appearance from the outside of the armor. We also see leather used as a covering. Several of the Visby finds have fragments of leather underneath the rivet heads, the original rivet heads on some of the plates. The interesting thing to note about this is most of the examples that show leather also show on the plates impressions left from the fabric that was also present. So it seems like the fabric itself was the main foundational structural component, with the leather acting as a cover to provide that extra shell, if you will, on the outside. Dr. Bengt Thordeman, the author of Armor from the Battle of Visby, who also did the analysis on the armors themselves, asserts that leather could have been used historically as the sole foundation for a coat of plates. If this was done, it would have been, based on the evidence we have, the most infrequent method of doing it, because it seems like a textile base with a leather covering or velvet or silk covering was the most common way of going about the structure. So, all right, jumping back to the history now. So the coat of plates starts to pop up in the late 13th century in wills and inventories. Often referred to as like a hauberk of plates or pair of plates. And then we start to see them come up in artwork at about the same time. So often the first visual representation of a coat of plates that we see is the Saint Maurice statue in Germany, and it's usually dated to around 1250. But what you'll notice is the earliest kind of incarnations of the coat of plates, instead of using what we're used to seeing on like a Visby style coat of plates, we see a full-length surcoat that is reinforced by plates. So the full-length surcoat was very common at the time, being worn over the mail harness that was common in the 13th century. But now we're starting to see evidence for them actually reinforcing that surcoat with rigid defense. So you can see what look like rivet heads on the front of the surcoat that he's wearing here. And then if we look at it from the back, you'll see how it wraps around the sides of the body into the back and then buckles closed in the back. Obviously, significantly more substantial than just a plain textile surcoat being worn over your hauberk for heraldic display. Some other early examples that coincide with the early coats of plates are, this one is particularly interesting. It's a another surcoat style this is a statue of a sleeping guard from a monastery in Germany, also dated to the second half of the 13th century, and you can see the individual plates riveted to the surcoat on the front of the garment here. This is a detail of an effigy from England, also dated to the second half of the 13th century, and you can see the mail-clad arm. We're basically looking at the side of the chest here under the arm. So you have the mail-clad arm, and then the what looks to be a textile surcoat, and then underneath that you can see the buckle and strap closure of something obviously more substantial than simply a textile surcoat being worn, but would likely be an early pair of plates. Moving into the 14th century now, what we start to see is, instead of the surcoat being reinforced, we start to see the way that it's constructed is basically the same, but the overall length has now shortened to about the hips. So instead of that full-length surcoat, we see what we more commonly think of as the Visby style coat of plates. We see similar representations all over the Romance of Alexander manuscript from the mid-14th century. And what's important to note about this style is the silhouette that it presents is very similar to the earliest styles, where it doesn't really have any of that anatomical shaping like we're used to seeing on actual solid breastplates. So instead of cutting in at the waist, it's very straight down the sides. And the most compelling examples of these are the actual finds from Visby itself. So the Battle of Visby, fought in 1361, mass graves were excavated in the early 20th century, and they discovered several nearly complete examples of coats of plates. The important thing, as I've mentioned and harped on this in other videos, is although the battle dates to 1361, the actual armors that were being worn were very old-fashioned and outdated for that particular time. So even though the battle was fought in 1361, it gives us a glimpse into what the coat of plates of several decades earlier would have looked like. So think more 1320s, 1330s, 1340s, in that neighborhood would be more appropriate for the dating of this style of coat of plates. But looking at the examples, what you're going to see is there's really a lot of variance in the different coats that were uncovered at Visby. You have some that were arranged in mixes of vertical and horizontal plates. You have some that are basically a small number of larger plates. You have some that include shoulder defense, some that don't include shoulder defense, some that may or may not have included more substantial back defense. You also have examples that were made up of a very high number of very small plates. So a lot of different styles and variants. But overall, they give that kind of same relatively flat silhouette that we would expect from the earlier styles of the coat of plates. Then in about the 1340s, we start to see a shift away from that more rudimentary coat of plates to what's becoming a more shaped coat of plates, and would eventually become the very, give you that typical late 14th century kind of wasp-waisted coat of plates that we'll look at in the next video. But in the 1340s, what we start to see in artwork is instead of that flat presentation, what we see are things like this, where the waist is a lot more cut in. The chest has now become a lot more broad than we see in the earlier examples. We see this both reflected in manuscript images and effigies of the time. They're all over German effigies of the time, especially in conjunction with retention chains. The retention chains attach to the chest portion of the coat of plates, and then are usually attached to the dagger, the sword, the great helm. Some have 4 chains. I'm not sure what the 4th chain would be used for. Some have less. Some only have 2. And there's some variance there as well. But the other important part of these styles of coats of plates is that the broad chest and the shaping implies a more rudimentary solid breastplate starting to develop underneath there. If you look at the way that they're shaped, it doesn't look like just a series of flatter plates being riveted to a textile. It looks like something more is going on. And when we look at one of the survivals from this time, you can see that that's exactly what's happening. You have a more complete breastplate than you did in the Visby styles, where those individual plates are kind of coming together to form a more domed, more curved, larger solid breastplate, which would eventually become more refined until we actually have true solid breastplates and very curved solid breastplates of the late 14th century. All right, so now what we're gonna do is take a look at an example of a reproduction based in the style of the Visby finds. Okay, so what I have in front of me now is an example of a reproduction that is based on the style of the Visby coat of plates. The interior plate configuration, when we take a look at it, we'll see is most similar to the Visby number 1. However, this one does not include the shoulder defenses and has different style rivet heads and things like that, so it's not an exact reproduction of that particular one. This one also utilizes a leather shell as the foundation for the attachment of the rivets. It does not include a textile foundation, but what we found from using it is the leather seems to work pretty well on its own. So what you can see here that the basic silhouette, like we talked about, it's very straight on the sides, gives that kind of barrel impression instead of the more wasp-waisted look that we'll see later in the 14th century. So looking inside, what you can see is each of the individual plates, even on the sides and the chest, they're all curved. They're not just flat plates riveted to the inside of the shell. So the plates do have some shaping. Also, in addition to just being curved, which not only makes it fit better, but helps it deflect weapons better, the plates also all overlap each other. So what you can see is the chest overlaps the torso portion here, like the abdomen and waist, and each of these plates overlaps each other. So that provides two important functions. The first and most obvious is that it doesn't leave large gaps in the armor. If each of these plates were riveted next to each other, just kind of butted up next to each other or separated, you're going to start to introduce gaps, especially as you move where weapons can penetrate. The other important part is each of these plates is now reinforcing the other plates. So when one plate is struck, as it's hit, the force is going to be distributed to the other plates as well. So if you hit, this plate, it's also going to impact this plate, which is going to dissipate some force into this plate, and so on. So it lessens the actual impact force felt by the person on the inside of the armor. Because they are individual plates and it's riveted to a shell that is not completely stiff, what you can see is there is some movement here. So you do get some flex in the actual body armor itself. As you move over to the portion of the armor that protects the sides of the body, you can see that the sides also overlap the chest portion. So as it encloses around you, you get that, again, that overlapping protection as you go around the side of the body and ultimately to the back of the body. And again, these plates are all slightly curved as well to facilitate that shape. The closure, so as you wear it, when you close it, this portion will close around the side of the body, and then you can see here in the back you have a series of buckles and straps, one on the top, two on the sides in this particular model, and these will strap to each other, and then the top buckle, as doing that out of order. So the first thing you would do is put your head inside, close the back portion around you. Now this would be on your back, and then as these close around that, you have one strap here. This one corresponds to the other plate, and then the two sides attach to each other. And that's how the Visby style coat of plates functions. This particular one was made by a friend of mine, James Barker. He's a significantly bigger guy than I am, so this coat of plates does not really fit me at all. It makes me look like a coat hanger. But I hope that you've gotten a good enough look at the inside of it to see how it actually functions and how you can expect it to behave when utilizing this type of body armor in combat. And as always, if you have comments or questions, please leave those down below, and I always try to get to as many of them as I can. If you like the video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already. Feel free to share the video, follow me on Facebook and all that other stuff. And until next time, we'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye.